think you're frozen, Anna.
Am I?
Oh no, I can hear you, but you're not moving.
Oh, that's all right. Don't worry about it. So I'm probably frozen in the office because it's so cold.
No, you're moving again now.
Yeah. So don't forget to check out the charity website and the latest news. And also, not sure if you saw Dragon's Den with one of our charity ambassadors. He was amazing, Ben, and it's still available on iPlayer. So Ben Pearson, and no, just I'm not going to spoil it for you if you haven't seen it. Just watch it; it's so good, and lots of information being posted on the charity website for you to keep updated. So I'm going to hand straight over to Paul because I know he's got a lot to say, and this time the topic is autism and sexuality. So thank you, Paul. Over to you.
Thank you. I just need to share my slideshow and then I'll begin. Ah, yes. Yeah. Okay. So this presentation is going to be about autism and sexuality. It's quite a, I suppose, quite a dense and lengthy topic. So I'm going to try and break it down into different pieces and try and explore different perspectives, different realities, different scenarios that could happen. I think there's someone with their audio on. If they just turn it off, thank you. Cheers if people check their audio. Thank you. So we shall begin. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of myself in terms of development. I was born in 1986, so part of my autism is prematurity and underdevelopment. I had brain injury due to placental abruption, which affected the left hemisphere of the brain, which is to do with language processing. There are genetics as well, and there's hereditary factors. Personally, in my family, there are other people diagnosed. I was blind to the right side of my body. That's to do with hemiplegia. And I was nonverbal and had speech and language delay, and functional speech wasn't gained until around 7 or 8 years old. So that was later infancy. And that's a picture of me in January 87, I believe. That was around 6 months old. So if we're going to look at the challenges around sexuality and sexual development, it's going to be different for all sorts of people. And I suppose not only does it come with awareness of one's sexuality, it also comes with how do you navigate that in terms of interaction and also intimacy. So we have to look primarily at the person as a whole and look at how a person modulates and sees the world. So this is to do with social perception, and there are different barriers in social perception, but primarily it could be to do with being monotracked in various different ways, modulations, presentations, etc., which can then lead to challenges around feedback. So this could be feedback from literal social perception, so how people are perceiving social interaction, to language processing, so how people are filtering words, language perception, so how people are perceiving language. And then we look at other things, I suppose, like the shared sense of self and other. And I suppose in terms of sexuality, this is an important aspect because sexuality is about sharing. Intimacy is about sharing, and the developmental thread of self and other starts for non-autistic individuals as early as age 5, but to as late as 7, 8 or 9. And these experiences is when the bonding process starts, and people are able in early days, so pre-sexuality, pre-intimacy, in infancy, start to bond and share in a more fluid like way. And one can do all self and all other in real time, and you start building up friendships, bonding, connections in a multi-track system. Now, some people on the autism spectrum struggle with this to varying different degrees and modulations and presentations. So it might be that one can do all self, no other, all other, no self. So there is a delay between the two. And I suppose when we look at sexuality and intimacy and things like that, if there are significant delays within those two modulations, it's about being self-aware that these things are happening. It's also about having healthy advocacy, boundaries and education around sexuality, sex and intimacy. This could be in the form of curricular sex education, which I know has changed a lot since I've been at school. And it could also be a way or a gateway in terms of extracurricular, or a specific teacher or a confidant or a friend, it doesn't matter who can give people healthy frameworks of what this actually is and how it presents itself. So you're looking at what the signs are of healthy intimacy, healthy relationships, healthy bonding, security, autonomy, attachment, bonding and things like that. But you may also have to go into other areas of challenges, such as the dangers. So this could be serious things like sexual.
All of our events, as well as our building opening hours, please visit our website on JW.
Is it okay if someone could? Yeah, sorry. So this could be things like sexual misconduct, inappropriate touching, potential dangers and risks of being exploited. So all these things have to be taken into consideration in a balanced, empathic and autonomous way. Now, when we look at all these different information processing challenges in the context of sexuality, it's about understanding the person's system within this framework. So we can start off with face blindness, and face blindness has about 30% correlation with autism, and that's about bonding with faces and recognizing faces and able to connect with faces quite quickly and readily and understand who someone is. So it might be that in terms of connection and creating connection, that the person may need to say who they are, even if they're a potential partner. So it's building up little bridges of understanding that this is how my system works. And when we go into social emotional agnosia, and particularly people that may have problems with understanding nuance, so if someone can't read body language, facial expression or tone of voice in a situation with regards to sexuality and intimacy, I suppose it's about being overt, it's about being transparent and opaque about what is going on, or what is potentially going on, or what is leading up to something that is going to happen, which could include intercourse. And it's about recognizing that that might be a way of talking to someone that is going to garner, hopefully, a connected response. Now, connected response is a response that is an internal reasoning of what that person wants to do. And of course, it can be a metaphorical minefield, because no is also valid as yes. If the person doesn't want to pursue, if the person doesn't want to do something at that point in time, this is where we go into the areas of acknowledgement of consent. Consent is extremely important, and no means no, and yes means yes. However, there is a grey area here with social emotional agnosia about understanding if the person means the opposite, and it may be actually delving a bit deeper into a dialogue that may actually need to happen at that time, so that both parties are actually explicitly and transparently aware of what each other's intentions are, because that is how you build up trust. That's how you build up recognition of likes, dislikes, etc. Now, the next aspect is language processing. So the ability to filter language. And this is extremely important in terms of when we think of intimacy and what people are saying to one another and how they talk, and what is being said. You can build up hypothetical scenarios of different aspects of this, such as foreplay or things like this, but it's all to do with context. It's all to do with understanding the person's system, what they want out of the experience. It's a dualistic reality, and I think that is an important notion for people to be aware of, even in the general population, that needs to be implemented, a sense of togetherness, a sense of connecting. I have worked with people on the autism spectrum who are frustrated by parts of their information processing challenges. And I think that's important to point out, because if there is an internal frustration, there's a sexual drive, but it's maybe not being filtered in the way the person wants it to be, or they have ideas of what they want to do, but they can't fulfill them for whatever reason. That can be incredibly challenging and internally quite upsetting for the person also. I can remember working with a gentleman who had significant language processing challenges, and he was attracted to a certain type of person, blondes, I believe, and all this came about through adverts. And one of the adverts that he liked was a shampoo advert. And what he'd done with his language is its pattern, theme, and felt, is when he saw someone he was attracted to, he'd go head and shoulders, chin up. And the reason why he said head and shoulders, chin up is because in the advert, the lady's obviously in a shower with a black background, and it's quite sexualized, I suppose, the advert, in terms of she's naked, although you can't see her nakedness, you see her from the shoulders up, and the nape of her neck goes up and she pouts. And as he's got older, obviously that's transitioned into more of a desire or an idea of someone I would like to have sex with or love, or a framework. And he also used to watch, and still does, watches Rod, Jane and Freddie. And he he spoke about Jane coming over to the house and Jane sleeping with Sam and Jane being in Sam's bed, etc. So when we think about different aspects of what people want, it may on some sort of external level actually be quite a contradiction to how their internal processing is going on and what their inner reality is. And I think this is all about understanding that realities, we can't judge them by external experiences. I've spoken about the shared sense of self and other, and there's another gentleman who I work with at a day centre. When he used to get sexually aroused and get an erection, etc., he would get very scared, and he would not be able to sort of filter the two modulations, and it would create a great amount of fear and emotional dysregulation. Now, he was in his 20s at this point, so we have to be mindful that some of these experiences may come later, and not only will they come later, they will come in different presentations. So the sense of sexual arousal was actually quite disturbing for him. It wasn't a comfortable experience because he didn't necessarily have a framework of what to do with it. And this goes rather nicely into alexithymia. If someone doesn't understand or internalize their emotions and their bodily sensations, what is arousal? What is that sense of sexual arousal? What does it mean if people don't necessarily have a filter or a context or a internal introspective bodily response to it? They may need help, they may need guidance, and it goes back to what I said about having frameworks, about having a balanced, three-dimensional conversation with someone about these different areas, and one must never push it. And the reason why one must never push these things is because we cannot always assume that people's sexualities are the same, and B, that everyone's sexual awareness comes at the same time. And that's a very important aspect. You don't talk about things if the person isn't internally and or developmentally ready to be made accustomed to them. That could actually potentially cause more confusion and potentially cause some unusual reactions because they're not there yet. You wouldn't tell an extremely young infant about sex, so why would you tell someone who may not be developmentally ready to hear it? And then of course we've got sensory perception and sensory hypersensitivities. So sensory perception and hypersensitivities could go into the realm of intimacy, lovemaking, etc. If someone has a level of sensory hypersensitivity, this may make the act quite difficult. In fact, it could be dualistically difficult because they may want to perform, but they can't. Because of their nervous system reacting to sensory sensitivities, and also sensory perception about how the person has mapped out their own body, and that includes the genitalia, it includes the sex organs, it includes whatever area is going to be used. I don't know how much I can really say in the morning about this, but I want to be as overt and transparent as possible. And also you have to take into account how the person sees themselves, how the person sees this situation, how the person is from potentially a sensory perspective, in terms of how they're internalizing sensations, how they're understanding their body schematics, and actually also what it almost dovetails into all the other examples I've given in terms of how the person feels, what the person's emotional input output is, frequency, regulation. Are they doing this as an automaton, or are they feeling that this is a shared experience where both parties feel comfortable with what is about to happen or what is leading up? Is it enjoyable? Is it fun? Is it ticking the boxes of preference? Is language okay? Where do I go with this? If people are loud, that may be uncomfortable. Let's just put it like that. So we have to take into account lots of environmental factors, whether the person is enjoying the act. So that goes into face blindness and social emotional agnosia. So these challenges around sexuality are extremely nuanced, but hopefully what I'm doing is giving examples to how this could work, or potentially the barriers that people need to discuss, disclose, and unpick. Now, exposure anxiety could potentially be a huge barrier to sexual awareness and intimacy. So if we think about sexuality and the course of sexuality, I've given hopefully an idea that this has many different modulations, presentations, and also whether it's an internal drive or want is extremely important. We must think about people with exposure anxiety, because being with a partner is in that sort of way requires a level of self-awareness, and I would say an extremely high level of being made aware of self, the way one talks to each other, the touching, you're intrinsically making one aware of each other's vibrations, language, and body. And these people may have extremely ticky, flighty nervous system responses to this. So this may need to be managed in a very particular way. And it goes back to what I've said about indirect confrontation. Now, this could be a very tricky circumstance for people where intimacy is extremely direct, and intimacy is all about that level of sexual and emotional directness, in terms of how one feels about each other, in terms of what one is doing to one another. It's an extremely direct, potentially contact-based scenario, and we have to, I suppose, be aware that this could be the underlying driver why some people on the autism spectrum who have exposure anxiety may struggle with intimacy, may struggle with wanting to connect with people, may struggle with relationships, may struggle with sexual intercourse, etc. The internal driver may be on top of that they want these things, but they may, as they get older, see exposure anxiety as the invisible cage. It's creating a barrier for me on what I want out of life, and it's very important to understand this in terms of how it presents itself, and looking at strategies around how to communicate about sex, how to communicate about sexuality, how to communicate about intimacy in a more indirect way. Now, the system of sensing is about modulation and merging with people. And this is important really, because if one merges with people beyond the interpretive thread, this may actually come as I suppose it could be considered a attribute, in the sense that if you're picking up on people's energies, then it may give you a idea of if you want to be around that person primarily, and if the person is, in terms of personality, conduct, not how can I put it, they're not transparent. There's a dissonance to what they're saying and what you're feeling, then of course could give you an idea that maybe you don't want to pursue that person. Maybe the avenue that you want to go down is going to have to be changed. And if we're talking about in terms of pursuit and flirting, I was speaking on a podcast about flirting and what flirting can mean, and I suppose flirting is an idea that I want to get to know someone, but I'm also communicating potentially that I am interested in them beyond talking. And what goes on beyond talking is about potentially sexual intercourse. And I suppose if you're in a situation where you're not getting good vibes from people and they're in pursuit, it may be worth thinking of how to get out of that situation in a way that is thinking about one's safety. And it's about maybe thinking of different ways of dissolving the conversation, or maybe being overt, saying I'm not interested, but we can still talk. Or what do you want out of this? Now, this might seem ridiculously odd to say that, but it's something I would imagine that should be said, really. If we think about situations where one is flirting, in the end you do want to know where this is going, what the person's intent is, and if it doesn't marry up, then one doesn't pursue. And it may be that the people in question need help with understanding their own introspection, so their own introspective reasoning, their bodily sensations. So it may be that they need to recognize when they feel uncomfortable, when they feel there is potential threat, etc. Or there may be people who are getting all these frequencies and dissonance and just need help with also getting out of the situation, because they kind of know that this isn't right. So they intrinsically know that it isn't right and they need to get out of it. So there's two different basic modulations. There's a literal logical person who doesn't quite understand what's going on and may need help with clarification in that way. There may be people that on an unconscious level have clarified that maybe this is potentially a situation I don't want to be in and I need help to get out of it also. Emotional regulation. When we think about sexuality, intimacy, and being around someone that you potentially have a connection with, which is love, we have to take into account how that comes out and how that can present itself. I can give you an example of my father, whose presentation is social emotional agnosia. He needs help and direction. So he loves my mum and he loves her dearly, but he does need help in direction in showing love, showing intimacy, showing that what he thinks and feels internally can be shown. There are equally other people that need help the other way, where it's very overtly tactile and potentially may need help around emotional regulation, excitement, arousal, understanding what that means, understanding that this is actually happening here and now, and what do I actually do with it. So there are people that can have very hyper reactions, emotional discourse and frequencies, and are getting all these sensations, but they may not necessarily know what to do with them. And it's all about direction at that point. So there could be buddings of self-awareness of one's sexuality and needing private time. So masturbation may be an avenue for that in terms of sexual exploration, and finally realizing or becoming aware that the genitalia is not just for urinating, it's actually a place that has other functions, and that's perfectly fine. I would say one has to take a step back as a parent or a carer and think about how to actually process that and navigate that, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to create shame attached to these sorts of feelings. So it could be about redirection and context. So for example, if someone, let's say, is masturbating in the I'm trying to think of a place in the house where you wouldn't think, okay, let's use the sitting room, so a communal area in the house. You've got to be very careful with potentially how you word it, because you don't want to say the act is wrong. You may need to redirect them. So this could be through indirect confrontation. It could be to do with whatever semantics work, but that you may redirect them to their room, the bathroom, etc. And I think this is an important thing to talk about, because you want to build an underpinning of that this is okay to do, but it's where you do it, and you are thinking of their privacy and their dignity and their autonomy, and also just the fact that it's something they need to do but in a different place. Now, context can be incredibly difficult for some people on the autism spectrum for various different reasons. It's not to do with cognition, it's to do with multi-layered things such as emotions, sensory perception, object blindness, meaning deafness. The list can go on. But if there is emotional regulation challenges, it's about trying to find strategies to understand what it is, where it's coming from, and what it means, and giving the person a ballast of reasoning, a foundation where they can actually be in a situation with a person that is of trust, to talk to them about their feelings, or to communicate with them about their feelings in a way that makes sense, so that the feedback and the expression is being validated. I think when we talk about emotional regulation, it's really about validating someone's reality, validating where they are at that point in time, validating their sexual drive or experiences as something that is a discourse of growing up, and giving them healthy alternatives, and it's very important to do that. I think it's all about giving healthy association, healthy alternatives, actually expressing it in a way where one doesn't feel that they're alone in this situation, that they have got someone to connect with, to communicate with. And I think that's extremely important in terms of building up one's own self-worth, but also understanding and navigating the emotional roller coaster that is what comes with sexuality. Next. So the fruit salad analogy is an analogy created by Donna Williams, and this, in the context of sexuality, we've gone through, if we look at some of these, so I've gone through information processing. We have to talk about mental health, so what people's association with sex and sexuality are. So this may be to do with the environment that they're in, cultural appropriation, different cultures, different reasonings, different ideas of what sex and intimacy are, create a very broad palette of what people think it is, when it should be done, how it should be done, etc., etc. And this can cause great confusion, I think, potentially for the individual. This could then spur into mental health challenges. So we have to be mindful of that. We have to also look at personality types and whether someone is hypersexual and has a very, very high sex drive in terms of need, or they're the opposite, they're hyposexual or asexual and don't necessarily need those things in their lives. It's all about individuality, and it's all about understanding needs and wants, but equally understanding other people's needs and wants. It's a dualistic, fluid aspect. And of course, identity includes sexuality, whether someone's bisexual, whether someone's homosexual, heterosexual, pansexual. There's different expressions of sexuality, and I think it's important that people A, understand this, and B, are presented with this fact in a way which is tangible, transparent and opaque. And it's all about that transparency in terms of what you point, or what ethos, underlying ethos you want to get across. So I hope you've enjoyed this. It's kind of a whistle top sort of movement through what the potential challenges could be, and how they could present. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I will be free for questions and answers after this. I hope you've enjoyed this, and thank you very much for listening.
Sorry, struggling there to even unmute myself. Thank you very much for that, Paul. It was fascinating as always. Are there any questions from anyone out there today? Anything that anyone would like to ask Paul? And it's not a problem if you have, because it's not, you don't always have questions straight away and they come to you after the event. Please do email either myself or Anna or Paul, and we'll try and get the information to you. This is recorded and it will be available for a very short period of time, probably about 2 weeks, on our YouTube channel. So you'll be able to re-watch it. And in that time, if you have any questions, please do let us know. And I'm sure Paul will be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Oh, have we got anything? Yeah, everyone seems to have enjoyed the workshop, Paul. So it's been very informative. Do we have any more workshops lined up, Paul, or are we?
Yeah, I've sent some dates
Brilliant.
to Lisa and Anna. It's just working out what the topics will
Perfect.
be. So that's coming later on in the year.
Brilliant. So if anyone can think of any topics that they'd like Paul to cover, that would be really helpful.
There's Karen Lovett, any advice on directing young people to safe materials online? Well, yeah, this is a huge minefield in terms of material online. Porn is just on tap, I'm afraid, with regards to the internet. It's being exposed at probably a far younger age than people should be looking at it. I know there are security apps and parental locks that can aid with restricting potentially pornographic material. Porn is a huge genre in itself, and there's some unfortunately pretty disturbing things you can find. So I think it's very important to just mediate and monitor your internet and actually look at apps to actually restrict potentially harmful content. I think from a cultural point of view, pornography is potentially damaging. It's kind of, I remember a blog by Donna William called Porn Induced Boys. And what the reason why she wrote that blog is that what it's giving, sadly, through association and just the whole setup, is that women and girls are there to be touched, to be objectified, to be groomed, to be molested casually. I sadly used to see this at school 20 years ago. Boys just thought it was completely okay to go up to girls and grope them. In fact, my mother at secondary school saw it all the time. And you often wonder where it comes from. And I suppose it comes from the environment they're living in. It comes from, you know, not being able to regulate themselves and needing help and direction to be able to regulate themselves. So this has a massive impact on how pornography, particularly for straight boys, gives them a very kind of almost fantastical view of what sex is, in a completely stupid way, if I'm really quite frank. It's awful, isn't it? I mean, I've seen porn and it's really ridiculous. It's got terrible acting because, let's face it, they're not doing it because they can act. You know, if a plumber knocks on your door, they're probably going to sort out your plumbing. They're not going to start, you know, bending you over and doing stuff. But sadly, this is what happens. And I think this has a detrimental effect on young children's minds, because A, they may not be emotionally mature to actually integrate what they're seeing and put it in their mind, and B, they may start getting ideas and may actually start echoing what they're seeing on screen. I remember working with a young man about 12 years ago, and he had ADHD and a learning disability. And he was introduced to porn, I found out, around 7 years old. Now, this had a terrible effect on his ability to learn. So when he was at school, he was just taking lines that he had heard from the porn and just going up to the female members of staff and just saying some most colourful things because he got it from there. So I think we have to really have a rethink about pornography and the psychological and social effect it has on young infants, if unfortunately they're watching it at that age, or teenagers, because it's not a healthy introduction to sex at all. It's particularly in straight porn, it's usually about the man dominating the woman. It's got nothing to do with the woman whatsoever. And if you think about that, what message is that giving to people? It's giving a rather unhealthy message. And also, don't you think the world is becoming boundaryless? It's rather scary. I mean, there are just some things that should just not be invited to a person's consciousness. And I feel, as you can hear, very strongly on this, that that I think there really needs to be a clampdown on pornography as a medium to introduce people to sex. Because let's face it, do people really need porn? How do you think we're all here? How do you think people were here pre-internet, pre-pictures? You know, we have to really take a step back and think about that. I hope that answers your question, because it's incredibly important that that people actually understand this. I'm just looking through. Are there any websites or useful materials which help educate young people about sex and relationships? Oh my goodness, there was, and I forgot the name of it. I was at a day centre which I worked for about 5 years, and I'm really annoyed. It was a huge book, a manual about sex and relationships and intercourse for people with autism and learning disabilities, and I had a flick through that, and it was really good. What it did is explain intercourse in a contextual, transparent way. Firstly, it used the appropriate language. This is what I'm all for. I understand why people create cultural sort of environmental language around genitals. I understand why people use them, people swear, people use obscenities and etc. But I think it's really important to use the right language, because we can think of another scenario. What if the person has a problem in that area and they don't have the language to actually say what area is the problem? So if they go to a doctor's and the parents don't know the language either, you know, we have to think about using the language, which I really liked. And it also explained a lot about masturbation and how the feelings that one gets, where to do it, communication around it. So what tips to use. If I'm going to have a little bit of a research after this and message Anna or email Anna with that book, because it was a really, really good book. As a side note, Donna Williams, which of her books best explains the fruit salad analogy? Well, there's two. There's Autism the Inside Out approach, which she authored and published in 95. And then there's a Jumbled Jigsaw, which is a sequel really, in an updated version in 2005, and you can get them on Jessica Kingsley Publishers, or you can get them secondhand, or you can get them on Amazon and other places as well. They're quite well known.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Paul. If you can send us that information, Paul, that'd be brilliant. And what I'll do is I'll email everyone with any resources that we can find, and just so that you have that. We'll also put them up on our website on the resources page. But please do sign up to our website just so that you can keep up to date with all the talks that Paul and Sean are doing, and plus the events that we've got coming up. The expo is back, which is fantastic. It's going to be in July. We will send out details, and hopefully I'll send the details to Paul, and we'd love you to be there and be part of the event as well, Paul. So hopefully we'll get to meet you in person at some point soon. Oh, sorry, June, not July. So, oh my God, it's even sooner than I thought. So yeah, so we're looking forward to lots of events again this year. Anna will keep you updated, but again, if you've signed up to the website, you'll get that information. So thank you again. Thank you, Paul, and a brilliant talk as always. Learned tons from that. So hopefully see you all again soon. Thank you very much for joining, and I will send an email out when this is up for you to watch again. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.